Hello, everybody. My name's Nick Cuthbert, and welcome to this PIE Live webinar. For the next hour, we're going to be talking about the rise of Southeast Asia, and specifically Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Now, this session forms part of the Acumen Higher Education Insight series, and every quarter now, I would say, they like to bring it to the PIE audience. And the reason they do this is for the engagement we get on these webinars. So I can see already people are telling us where they're from. They're messaging us at the side of the screen here. Hello to everybody. We have a huge audience for this session. This is obviously a topic of real interest. And it's fantastic to have you all joining us today. So a little bit of housekeeping from me. This session today is live, and we want your input, we want your questions. So please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen here. You can formally ask a question to our panel, and you can upvote other people's questions as well. And we will certainly start looking through those later in the session. And yeah, basically get involved. We want to hear from you, and we want some testing, feedback and questions for our panelists. So I'm going to hand over to Pete. Pete Richards is the Executive Director, UK and Europe for Acumen and part of the Sanam S4 group. And he is fresh off the plane back from a fabulous conference in Delhi, India. So Pete, over to you.
Thanks, Nick, and welcome everybody from wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good 2 a.m. I saw on the chat there, somebody's dialing in, it's 2 in the morning, so no pressure, we'd better make this good, I think. But thanks so much to the PIE for collaborating. We really enjoyed these sessions with the PIE, actually. We did 2 last year, and I think they were on admissions and enrollment. Pressures and tactics and strategies that universities can adopt in order to get over that sort of hump that the UK is experiencing. And we're delighted to be presenting today's session on Southeast Asia. As Nick said, my name's Pete Richards. I'm the Executive Director for UK and Europe for Sanam S4. Acumen, as the brand is starting to get a little traction. Acumen is the education division of Sanam S4. I'll come on to that in a moment. But I'd like to just allow each of the panelists to quickly introduce themselves, perhaps starting with you, Steph.
Hi, good.
Oh, Steph, you've muted yourself.
Yeah, double click there, Steph. I think you went straight off and on again.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
There we go. Got the way first. Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Pete. So my name's Steph Walton. I'm Director of Global Student Recruitment at Coventry University. And I'm thrilled to be here on my first live webinar in collaboration with my colleagues on the panel. And the reason is just a very bit of a brief context. I've joined the education sector in recent years. I spent 25 years in executive search and headhunting in the city. So I was brought into Coventry really to look at the channels that we recruit into and bring real presence to our markets. So I'm here to contribute, but also to learn from all of you in this session. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I look forward to the next hour.
Thank you, Steph. Jasmine, over to yourself.
Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jasmine Bawal. I'm Regional Manager at Durham University, so responsible for all things Southeast Asia. I've worked in international recruitment for about 9 years now, and I can firmly say that Southeast Asia is my favourite region. So it's great to be talking about it today. Thank you.
And over to you, Cecilia.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Cecilia, and this is my 27th year in the sector. I'm originally from Malaysia, very passionate about Southeast Asia, and I'm the Director of Client Success at Acumen.
And last but not least, Heike.
Yeah, hi everyone. Xin Chao. My name is Heike Manning. I'm the Executive Director Southeast Asia for Sanam S4 Acumen. And as Xin Chao suggested, I am coming to you from Vietnam, where I've been based now for almost 11 years. So seen a huge amount of change, really positive change during that time. And my role is to oversee SANMS for Acumen's expansion and operations throughout Southeast Asia, building on the current office network we have in the region of Vietnam, both Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, Singapore, and Malaysia, and soon Indonesia as well. Thanks, Pete.
Excellent, thank you. I think Sam Whiteside has just asked if the session is being recorded. It is, I believe, isn't it, Nick? And we'll be able to, yeah, great.
You can stream it as soon as this finishes. You can stream it again.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Just a very quick preamble, I think, before we get into a Q&A with the panel and with also colleagues joining us. SANMS4 Group, as many of you will know us, Acumen is a sort of sub-brand for the education division, which is becoming more well-known. Just a quick intro in terms of who we are and what we do. We have been providing services into the higher education sector around the world now for 15 years. It's our 15th birthday, in fact, since 2008. Predominantly and initially with an in-country presence model. This is, as many of you will know, the ability for us to host staff around the world for the purposes of typically student recruitment for universities, but increasingly universities are asking us to help them provide consultant services and staff to support things like admissions and enrollment support, also partnership activity, T&E activity, and more recently in the US market, fundraising. We do also have a separate product, admissions and enrollment support, a product that we call PACE, helping universities prospect, admit, convert, and enroll students. Everything from top of funnel, getting more inquiries in the top, all the way through to pre-arrival and credibility interviewing for UK universities, and everything in between for any given market. And also just broader consulting. We consult to a lot of universities, modern universities, Russell Group universities, especially around T&E and market entry strategies, but broadly speaking, any question that a university has for us around internationalization is something that we can have a look at on behalf of our partners and other universities. So I think as a preamble, I think, as a lot of people on the call, particularly from UK universities will know, the UK International Higher Education Strategy identified a target for the UK to deliver 600,000 international students by 2030. And as a sector, we achieved that target. Nick, help me out here. Was it last year or the year before? It was well in advance of the target anyway, sort of 9 or so years early. Growth, as a lot of you will know, has been achieved by a very, very large rise in student volumes from India. We're looking at projected numbers and the super rise of India, if that makes sense. Not only has that just recently, I think, or is about to overtake China in terms of the most populous country in the world. We see the inbound student recruitment data from India is on a line where we think those lines may cross in 2 cycles' time. What's been really fascinating for me, and I'm sure Cecilia as well, in talking to our partner universities around the UK, of which we have 40 and rising, the question that we were kind of hearing 2 or 3 or 5 years ago around China and the need to potentially diversify away from China, it's just starting to filter in about India as well. So I think a lot of universities are looking at how they might be able to diversify their inbound student recruitment market from China and India, particularly for some core streams. So we're looking at other markets, as I know a lot of UK universities are, and sort of seeing, well, where is the best bet for that diversification? Certainly looking at sub-Saharan Africa, particularly with Nigeria, that could be potentially high risk, though for some universities. Middle East, North Africa, the Middle East market can become quite complex because of that market being driven, not exclusively, but certainly an awful lot for sponsored students, which really makes us gaze at Southeast Asia, which is the market that we're focusing on today. We see a lot of drivers, a lot of macro data, and a lot of reasons why we think Southeast Asia is the bet, if that makes sense. And my first question really is over to Heike. In your role as the executive director for that broad Southeast Asia region, can you maybe provide the group with some sort of macro insights about the region, key countries, some demographic trends, and maybe some other highlights and insights into why we, as an entity in the sector broadly, is starting to really review Southeast Asia market as a really, really good progressive market to help diversify portfolio?
Sure, thanks, Pete. And yeah, it was interesting actually last week, as I think Nick mentioned at the start, a number of us, or many of us, were in India last week for the Global Gateway Summit that Acumen hosted. and I was there as well. And actually, of course, 90% of the focus was on India and its incredible rise and all the opportunities there. But actually, the subtext of that was also, wow, okay, India is really coming. It's growing very quickly. What are we going to do? And how do we achieve our diversification objectives outside of India and China? And so there were quite a few conversations around Southeast Asia, even last week when I was in India. So just to kind of give you a little bit of context, I guess, the geography buffs amongst you will know that when we're talking about Southeast Asia, we're talking primarily about the 10 countries that make up the ASEAN region, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And please don't ask me to reel off all 10 because I'll probably miss one. But for all intents and purposes, it includes those key countries of Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand. Those are probably the 6. And I think Nick mentioned these are the 6 focus countries for the discussion today. And so, I think the key thing is that, first of all, is that when you look across Southeast Asia, it's a very diverse group of countries, very diverse in terms of culture, history, and even linguistically. And that presents a number of challenges in many ways in terms of operating across the region. So when we look at the region, which is now around 670 million people and growing, you can't kind of just look at it in a sort of a monolithic kind of way, in the way that you might view another very, very large market. They are 10 very distinct markets, and the 6 that are of focus are 6 very distinct markets as well. So I mentioned 670 million folk across Southeast Asia as a whole. And just to, everyone knows that Indonesia, of course, is massive, 4th largest country in the world by population. But even just to say that, when you look at a place like Vietnam, just ticked over 100 million people, Philippines, over 110 million people. These are very, very large populations and still growing as well. So the demographics are really strong, not only in terms of the number of people in total, but also in terms of that key demographic, that 0 to 19 age bracket, which looks really, really solid, right through to 2040 at least anyway, before the demographics will begin to change. So I think the other thing as well is when you're thinking at the sort of the macro level about Southeast Asia, obviously you've got the population growth and the demographics, which are sort of foundational, I think, in considering where your future students might come from. But in addition to that, Southeast Asia has really been one of the engines of growth globally over the last 25 years. It's not been a linear thing. There's ups and downs as there are anywhere, but the overall trend has been super positive. And not only have economies grown, but more importantly, incomes have grown. And so what we're seeing is really strong growth over a long period of time in terms of income. And what that's doing is it's not only providing more and more people with disposable income at the top end of society, which are the traditional sort of areas for recruitment for students to study abroad, but we're also seeing the emergence of that really strong middle class. And I hesitate to use the word because it's very much misused, but the middle class, those who actually have a sizable disposable income and who may not yet be able to send their children overseas for a full international experience, but are certainly looking for some international education option for their child, which will bring more and more transnational and T&E education into play. So just to give you one example in terms of that income growth, when you look at, for example, Vietnam, I saw a study recently from McKinsey which talked about the growth in the consumer base in Vietnam. So between 2020 and 2030, so within 10 years, they expect the middle class base to double from about 8 million households to 16 million households. And that's defined as families with a disposable income of $22,000 USD per year on a purchasing power parity basis. So it gives you an idea of the growth and the trends. Just a couple of other things before I sort of hand back. The other thing that's really, really important is student mobility out of the region is already significant. And The key countries there in terms of outbound student mobility are Vietnam, by some distance, is the largest sender of students abroad for higher education from the region, followed by Malaysia and Indonesia. And those three countries account for more than 2/3 of all the students going from Southeast Asia to the rest of the world, primarily to the English-speaking destinations. And finally, I think, and we'll come back to this a little bit just to sort of set the scene, these economies and these countries are not static. It's not just in terms of income growth. We're also seeing major changes in terms of their economy structures and also in terms of the school systems that exist in these countries, which are becoming increasingly internationalized as well. So all of these things sort of add up to some really, really interesting dynamics. And I think that's why we're seeing increased interest from many international institutions in Southeast Asia.
That's really great, Heike. And I know you've got a huge bank of data and understanding and knowledge of that broad region. I think one thing that resonates with me from a piece of research that I think you conducted earlier this year or late last year, the Vietnam piece that you did, was, you know, Vietnam and the UK's kind of position in that particular market, which, as you say, is a huge outbound student recruitment market. I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm running from memory when I read that report, UK higher education, brand UK, if that makes sense, in this sector, was revered as being the best in the world by Vietnamese prospective students. However, that's not necessarily yet, anyway, reflected in the volume. So this is, you know, UK versus US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and we know, you know, there's a bit of a kind of paradigm shift occurring in the moment, I think, but a lot of the students from the region look sort of down and across to Southeast Asia, to Australasia, sorry, for their recruitment. But, you know, what do you think the UK can do specifically around seizing that opportunity? You know, our sector, our higher education, is revered as being the best in the world, but we may be ranking 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th in terms of destination to study in that particular market. So looking particularly against, you know, Australia and New Zealand, what do you think the UK institutions can do in that market to really take advantage of that?
Sure, yeah, and thanks for mentioning New Zealand. Just a disclosure, conflict of interest. I am from New Zealand, so in case I speak up in favour of them again. So in terms of the position of the UK and Vietnam, it's a really interesting one, because when you look at you know, all the other English-speaking destinations, Vietnam is a top 5 global source market for US, for Canada, for New Zealand, and for Australia. And as I said, it is by far the largest outbound sending market from Southeast Asia as well. And the UK has traditionally struggled a wee bit more, and there are a whole range of reasons for that. Many of them are historical and relate to where Vietnamese families settled after the war, and you have very large populations, particularly in the US, Canada, and Australia, which act as a pool for students to go there. But I think over time that is changing, and I think the other thing in terms of what will potentially cause parents and students to start to look at the UK again is this change in the K-12 system in Vietnam. So we're seeing just a massive thirst for internationalization at the K-12 level, with like whole massive school systems emerging, which are bilingual school systems, offering 2 different types of diploma: the local diploma and also an international diploma. And A-levels and IGCSE, Cambridge, Oxford, those are the sort of the gold standard and what everyone's particularly interested in. So what we're going to see, I think, is more and more kids coming through the system who are exposed very early on to an English branded education. And I think that will flow through in due course to far greater student numbers for the UK and Vietnam.
Perfect, thank you. That's really interesting. Keen to bring this into university land, actually, and just sort of get a view from Jasmine and Steph regarding how, in broad terms, in macro terms, both Durham and Coventry view Southeast Asia as a market right now. Just sort of, is it a proof point in terms of your desire to diversify away from China and India, or are we just making that up? And in terms of how you're looking at Southeast Asia as a market against Sub-Saharan Africa, maybe in Middle East, North Africa, where does it sort of appear on your chessboards? And I think Do you want to tackle that one first, Jasmine?
Yeah, it's a really important region at Durham, especially because diversity is strategically really high of importance. So as you mentioned, Pete, the numbers for China are still there, even though they've kind of declined recently, and the India numbers are growing. I think Southeast Asia's got the perfect balance of still being able to hit those volume targets in certain countries, but also providing that quality. Especially as quite a kind of a high-ranking university, we're looking at markets that can hopefully afford the fees in a lot of cases, but also can meet those entry requirements. And throughout Southeast Asia, we find that we have some really high-quality students. And as you mentioned, Heike mentioned, the desire to go to the UK, it kind of varies throughout the different countries, but it is definitely there. So we see those numbers grow year on year. We tier the markets internally, so there are some markets that we would tier higher for Southeast Asia, so Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, which will vary for other universities who are looking at maybe more modern universities. But we're looking at the UK demographics, the demand, and we're also looking at countries that can provide students to a range of different course areas. So course diversity is really important to us too, not just diversity on campus. There's also, a range of different recruitment tools you can use in Southeast Asia through the agent network, schools, international schools. So yeah, really, really high on our agenda. And as you mentioned, there is a little bit less of a risk than some of the other markets. It does tend to be a safe market. Sometimes the return on investment can be higher than some of those big volume markets, but the diversity is important to us. So yeah, definitely plays a big part of our strategy.
Perfect. Thank you, Jasmine. Steph, I'm really grateful that you're here, and I love the fact that you're new to the sector, actually, and can provide that sort of fresh pair of eyes to the conversation. And I know, for disclosure, I spoke at Coventry University, and I know how sort of data-driven that institution is, and I assume you've come up to speed really quickly in terms of the markets and the key markets and the tiering of them and so on. So what's the view of the world from within Coventry regarding Southeast Asia more broadly?
Yeah, no, thanks, Pete. So for sure, we are a very different institution to Jasmine and Durham. So we are obviously proud to be a modern university with a wide portfolio that's able to say yes to most students who have a desire to want to further their education. That's either home, domestic, or overseas students. So we are in a situation where we resonate really with that target the government set of meeting our goal of overseas student targets very early, 8-9 years early. And I will call it overwhelmed because came from South Asia, particularly from India. So when I took this role on, what I heard around the university, and we are an education group, so we have a number of entities and a number of different campuses in terms of destinations that students can access our courses at. What was really, really coming through very strongly, not from Coventry as an institution and our leadership team or our academics, but actually from the students themselves in the lecture rooms. So the Indian students in particular were saying to me and my team, where are all the other students? We want an international experience, and Coventry is like a global university in its essence. Like, it is part of our strategic plan to have reach globally, and that is for enterprise, for research, for education, and to have presence in markets to be able to, influence the sector globally with policymakers, with governments, etc. But really at the foundation of what Coventry is about is teaching, and we want the best student experience. So when I heard that very early on at the start of last academic year, it was really clear to me that actually we need to address this, and it is a concern in terms of an over-reliance on certain markets. And we all know that there's volume that can come out of China, out of India, and Nigeria to a certain extent. But SEA, so what I did was I took over the post at the end of August last year, and my first opportunity to travel, my first region to go to was Southeast Asia, and I spent a month in the region on the ground, and that was very significant and a tactical plan from me, because I needed to understand from the horse's mouth, from students, from parents, supporters, schools, institutions, and our agents, what is the narrative there? And actually what I walked away with is, particularly from Malaysia, Vietnam and Thailand, there's a real pro-Western, pro-UK sentiment, right, from the students out there. So a British education still holds a lot of value, and in general, like, students want to, you know, a better quality education. And in general, what I found was actually PSW helps here in the UK, but most students go back to country. They go back to their homes and they take up employment or work in family businesses. So where we're working in the UK with a backdrop around our external environment and the government having this, you know, intense pressure on immigration, this is not a problem for Southeast Asia. Like, these students will come and contribute to the economy. They will come and have an uplift in the skills that's available whilst they're here. But actually what they will do is take their education back and benefit their local economy and back in country. So I was really inspired by that. The challenge I have at Coventry, which is probably not Jasmine's challenge at Durham, is positioning Coventry as a destination of choice, because obviously what I then discovered is what we've got is very ambitious and high attaining students in these markets. So therefore Coventry would be, I'm guessing, a second choice for some students. So they would have high aspirations to go to, let's say, the Russell Group. And I know now offer making has returned to a more measured and conservative approach now after COVID. So therefore, we want to take advantage of those students that perhaps are very ambitious, academically able, but perhaps not able to achieve the standards that Russell Group have set. And I think there's definitely a market there for Coventry to then find and identify the right students that will thrive in our education group. So, you know, long story short, you know, whilst I guess, well, everybody knows that Coventry is a volume student recruiter because we have so many campuses, so many intakes, and a wide portfolio. In this situation, quality trumps the quantity that's coming out of those markets. So we're actually very happy with quite small numbers, quite modest numbers at the moment. But just to caveat with that, with the fact that we've put full teams in market that didn't exist before. So there is presence on the ground from Coventry recruiters who are actually working directly with students, institutions and agents to position our offering in the most credible way possible. So that's our investment to the region. And, you know, I look forward to having some, you know, benefit of that, of seeing our students arrive on campus from September onwards, because we've seen a healthy pipeline materialize out of that work over the last 9 months. So yeah, and what I found was that the students over in Southeast Asia find the UK a very comfortable destination for them, because there's actually a lot of links there. A lot of them have relatives, family, or they have experiences in their communities of students doing well, having had a UK university. And just to say as well, a lot of my staff are actually alumni from Coventry. So they came from the region, studied at Coventry, and then have now been recruited to promote our brand back in market. So it's very exciting and very, very much part of top of the agenda in terms of priorities.
Yeah, thank you. That's so interesting. Just to pick up on a couple of points. You know, the diversity of the portfolio for the student experience, but also from a business perspective. I remember one university a number of years ago in a sort of former life within the sector, not a university that I worked in, but a university that I was working with, if that makes sense. Very, very reliant on the students from Nigeria because of oil and gas courses predominantly. When the Nigerian economy crashed in 2015, it really, really exposed them, you know, and I think they've become much better as a consequence of just making sure that they diversify for commercial reasons their portfolio. And I think we all swallow hard and look at our shoes at the prospect of maybe losing post-study work from India, for example, and what that might do to our market should that happen. Let's not think about that. I've just had a shiver go down my spine. But just popping over now the conversation, talk about authenticity of the student journey as well. Former students, you know, that are now in roles that are advocating for your university. I think that's such an important point also, and that sort of embodies what Cecilia is about. Actually, I think Cecilia, I'll start to tell your story, then maybe you can elaborate. But you came from Malaysia to study in the UK. I never went back, essentially, which makes the story that you have and the advice that you have so authentic. But Cecilia, if we come down to sort of tactics now, if that makes sense, in terms of what universities can do, you know the market across Southeast Asia, especially Malaysia, but across Southeast Asia, better than most, actually. What recommendations would you give to university, not just maybe UK, although we'll focus on that, to sort of tackle the market currently, given the rise from across Southeast Asia? What are those sort of tactics you think universities can adopt?
So I'm going to be really honest as usual. I think, be authentic. I think universities need to just be very real in the market. Southeast Asia is a mature market, mature region. Malaysia is a very mature market. And parents and students can really see through you. So I think in your strategy, it needs to be authentic. It needs to be real. So visibility, availability, your presence is crucial. And for many of the students and the parents, what they want is, they know that UK, for example, has the quality of education. But what they want is beyond that. So they want to see what the living experience is like, what the employability is like, what the return on investment is like, for many people across Southeast Asia. And I'm very careful not to stereotype, because anywhere in Malaysia is not the same. One Malaysian is never the same as another Malaysian, so bear that in mind. The most important thing for many Asian parents is education. So as soon as the child is born, for many parents, they have an education fund that they set up. If they have the means, they will do that. And it's always the desire is for your children to be better than you. So if you have that in mind, you will know that that is what forms their thinking. So they will send them to international schools or private schools with the idea that, the ultimate aim, ambition is to get an overseas qualification with a view to return and stay home. And as Steph said, join the family business or take employment across the region as well. So not just have the desire to work in a Western country. The desire is actually to be globally able and globally attractive towards employment. I think what I would also say to anyone looking at Malaysia, and be that UK universities, European universities, let your strategy be creative. So if you're looking at Malaysia as a whole, don't just focus on the Klang Valley or Peninsular Malaysia. East Malaysia has got lots to offer. The smaller towns have got lots to offer. They have high economic opportunities. The parents can afford to send the children overseas. In your strategy as well, you need to consider T&E opportunities. So I think sometimes institutions fail to think that there is opportunities for home students to go in market. So home students to move. So mobility the other way around. So UK to Malaysia, Malaysia to UK. And the way to do this is through T&E. Joint programs offer that opportunity. It enables UK students to experience all that ASEAN has to offer. There's so much more beyond just education. There's so much employment opportunities. And that is another way of recruiting Malaysian students, for example, or Southeast Asian students to the UK. Another thing to remember as well, Malaysia is a regional education hub. It hosts approximately 150,000 international students. The main student bodies or sending countries that send to Malaysia are China. There are lots of students from Indonesia. They are the second largest that come to Malaysia as a study hub. So for UK universities or global universities recruiting in Malaysia, your opportunity to recruit is beyond Malaysians. It's recruiting other students from other countries. And the other thing I would say is when you want to look at your strategy again, think about engagement with parents and alumni and employers and build that into your strategy. So that can feed into the subdivisions of your strategy, which is around employability, around alumni engagement, around fundraising, and around student mobility. I hope that answers it, Pete.
Yeah, that's really insightful, C. And a few things that I've jotted down while you're speaking, that authenticity of your pitch, the authenticity of your marketing and the conversations that you're having with prospective students and their families is just so important in all markets, I think. But every time I speak to you, you remind me of how important that is across Southeast Asia and especially Malaysia. Just keen again to bring it back to Steph and Jasmine really around the approach. As Heike said, it's such a big region. If you collectively look at Southeast Asia as a region, it's huge and geographically spread very far and different culturally. In terms of how a university can tackle that market, you can do that with fly in, fly out IO, international office models. You can do it with partnering with a business like Acumen to provide consulting services, to provide boots on the ground. I think Coventry's approach is different. They actually physically have a hub in market. I think Singapore, maybe Steph can confirm that. But Jasmine, I'll come to you first. How have you kind of taken this market, and what does Durham actually do in terms of making sure that they've got spread and authenticity in terms of agent network, talking to students, etc.?
Yeah, it's a huge market. Definitely. We've had to really think about how we tackle it. So as I mentioned before, we have that tier approach. So tier 1 markets, tier 2, tier 3. So tier 1 are more mature, where the UK sees large numbers, but as an institution, we've had reputation in, we're the right product for. So for us, that's Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. Again, history reasons, the quality's there. Places like Singapore, the fees don't tend to be an issue. So we've really thought about how our product works in those markets, but then also making sure that we have markets that are emerging for tier 2 as well, like Indonesia and Vietnam, and making sure that we're diversifying that risk. I mean, with Singapore, for instance, we're seeing that the competition from Singaporean universities ramping up. So we kind of want to keep that market going, but look at different markets as well. We're quite late to the in-country market in terms of having somebody in place. So it was just me for 3 years. And quite recently, we've hired somebody through Acumen to be based in KL. So it's 2 of us now. So completely different to the likes of Coventry and some of the kind of larger universities in terms of having a huge spread. I mean, hopefully we'll get to a point where we can have somebody in all of the region, in the different markets, but we have to show that role works first and foremost. And I'm confident it will be. I mean, it's so important in terms of the flexibility and availability. Just having someone that can pop into an agent office for a coffee, do a last minute fair, talk to parents. We're already seeing the effect of that in terms of conversion. So I think in-country staff was so important. But I have seen that councillors do want to see somebody from the UK still. I don't think that's ever going to go away, UK or Australia, wherever you may be based. So I also need to make sure I'm going out and visible in market, especially for the more strategic trips where it may be, like your larger offer holder events or those larger agency events as well. So I don't think we'll ever get to a place where we're just not needed to be kind of situated on campus. We need to be that link, especially within the university, being an advocate, to academics, to admissions. That link's really needed, but in-country staff makes such a difference in terms of being able to react in time and also get the intel off the ground as well. That's really important.
Yeah, sure. That's really really interesting, and I think the way that market has evolved, and will continue to evolve is quite fascinating. But I think also from a carbon neutral perspective, we were talking to a lot of universities who just wanted to adopt something with a little bit more presence rather than just flying people in and out all the time, particularly in markets where a recruitment trip driven wholly and exclusively and always exclusively from the destination market, in our case the UK, to get on a plane to Malaysia, then get on another plane and go to Singapore, then get on another plane and go somewhere else. I think from an ecological perspective, and then COVID happened, right? And interesting sort of sub question, Jasmine. How are you seeing attitudes in that market as we sort of emerge from COVID? If I remember the SARS days, Southeast Asia was one of the last markets to bounce back from SARS. Are you still seeing a little bit of that in market?
We've pretty much recovered across all of those markets. In fact, with some of our markets like Thailand, we've had our best year yet. So we've actually seen come off the back of COVID and increase still. I think that with Malaysia, Indonesia, all of the kind of the main markets, face-to-face is so important. There's a question in the chat as well, which was interesting around online versus face-to-face. We really see that on the whole, Southeast Asian students want to be face-to-face, whether that's a campus in Malaysia or on campus in the UK or elsewhere. They really like that kind of human interaction. So we have kind of recovered across all of those markets, and in some cases an increase. So COVID has been and gone, which is great. But yeah, we're definitely seeing that. We had a pre-sessional online last year and the year before. We've actually made a decision to get rid of that this year because the numbers are so low. But the on-campus pre-sessionals increased. So yeah, on the whole, kind of made a comeback as a UK sector, and face-to-face still seems to be paramount where it can be afforded, of course, because sometimes online can be a better option in terms of cost effective. Perfect,
thank you. Steph, just coming to Coventry now for a moment. My recollection from my Coventry days, it's a hub model. You physically have entities at strategically important places globally. From memory, I think it was Singapore, the Singapore hub for Coventry. How does Coventry sort of tackle the broad market from a hub in Singapore? What's your sort of tactics on the ground, so to speak?
So just so I can clarify that, actually, Pete, we have a hub in Singapore for sure, and actually part of our strategic plan is to have hubs in key markets. So we've just opened China hub. I'm going out there in a couple of weeks in Beijing. We will be opening Delhi hub later on this year, and really that's Coventry's commitment to the region. So to have a Coventry University branded presence that is not a campus, it's not a teaching facility. It's like I want to kind of touched on earlier, is our presence around enterprise and research and government links and policymakers in market to be able to influence the sector, not just for Coventry's gain, but for the overseas and internationalisation of education. I think it's important that Coventry invests in those regions. So we have different types of staff based at the hub. I have regionally and in-market deployed teams of recruiters on the ground. And I actually read last night, just in preparation for this, that Australian universities, 99% of Australian universities have on-the-ground presence in market. So where they are aggressively being their true authentic self through their staff and their people, engaging face-to-face with the market, we also have a job to do to combat that, because of course Australia is the winner there in that region in terms of like the volume that they recruit out of Southeast Asia. However, I think there's something in terms of a takeaway from that, because I think going back to that what the panelists were saying earlier in terms of like showing up, understanding the market, understanding student behaviour, and understanding that it's actually a lifelong journey for parents to invest in this in their education. They don't want AI, they don't want a bot helping them on their journey. They actually want human intervention to make sure that they're investing their money in the correct institution, that their children and the student will be looked after in country and have picked the right destination for them. So the hub is our presence, and it's somewhere that we can host and showcase what Coventry's about regionally, but actually engaging in the student recruitment channels, that is through a staff team. And Jasmine's right that the people in market, the institutions and the agents, they want to see the leadership team from the university. So it's important that we come out to market and make our presence known and listen to actually what's happening and take away, I guess, some of the challenges and listen to some of the opportunities that they are presenting to us, so that we can work work together in partnership. But I think it's a three-pronged attack. So it's about us having our hub, it's about us having our teams, and it's also about the UK leadership team really connecting with the key players in those markets so that we can influence change and make sure that, you know, the UK, when I'm talking about Coventry as well as a destination, is, you know, front and center if it's right for that student, you know, that the student knows about our offering and understands how to access our education. So it's exciting, you know, it's exciting in terms of like the what outcomes can come out of there, because the appetite is so great.
That's a wonderful stat. 99% of Australian universities have some form of in-country presence. That's
yeah, I wish I remembered where that was from, but I read it last night.
Yeah, amazing.
So, Pete, I'm jumping in here because we're coming into the 15 minutes, the final 15 minutes, and we have 8 questions submitted here. So I think we should probably turn to them. It's a bit like air traffic control today. There's people dropping off and coming on. There's questions coming in. So, okay, I'm going to turn to these bits. It's a really fascinating conversation, actually, and I've got questions of my own, but I better go to somebody else's first.
Sure.
So from Sam, how do admissions teams handle the volume from these areas and prioritize, and how do you filter the quality candidates? So the whole volume issue is kind of worldwide. So how are we picking the quality, particularly from Southeast Asia, out in an admissions process?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I can take some of that for Coventry, because we are in a situation where we've had to manage that really proactively for the last year. And particularly what we've had to do is to work very closely with our colleagues in admissions to, what I'm going to say is, ring fence some of these markets. So where it's an actual strategic objective to diversify our student cohorts, we have to protect some of the markets. And that means prioritizing offer making in certain markets. And for us in Coventry, Southeast Asia is one of those. So it's really important that we have engaged our agents. That's how we predominantly recruit, actually. Engage them in what good looks like for Coventry, what are the conditions we are expecting the students to meet, and present us with that so that we don't overwhelm our admissions colleagues with incomplete applications or students that they can't make offers to. So really putting the onus back onto our partners to be really clear about what the expectations are of a student from Southeast Asia, and then internally negotiating with our admissions team on a turnaround, so we know speed of response. You know, time kills in terms of decision making, so a speed of response and an SLA has been agreed internally with our admissions teams, and then we've protected certain regions so that we can get because if it's low volume and high quality and the student has a desire to come to Coventry, then we need to do the right thing and admit the student. So it's those things really, and that is not easy, because the volume is incredible coming out of South Asia for us. But it's something that was negotiated externally with our partners and internally with our stakeholders. And I think we're in a much better place than we were a year ago. So each intake looks better. And I'm sure if you spoke to some of our agents, they would say it's a better experience in May. And again, we're driving that for September. So I think that would be my advice, is to start with a service level agreement that works for everybody, that you can at least attain, and then move it into so set your goals and then move it into a better place and keep striving, for better improvements.
And Jasmine, for you, in terms of a selective university, I mean, Durham has been selective for a long time. This isn't a new issue. So how are you prioritizing the applications you want, particularly around diversity? And by the way, I'm loving how you're having to move around so the university lights don't switch off every 5 minutes.
I know they're really keen on the eco here, so unfortunately I have to keep jumping up. I mean, I wish we could say we do prioritize certain applications, but we don't, and I think that's a real internal challenge we have here. I mean, as a recruiter, I would love to kind of push those diversity applications up the funnel, but unfortunately, the way the admission system works, they want everything done by date order, regardless of domicile and nationality. So that's a real challenge to work with. I mean, there's certain things that we've done that can help a little bit. We only take UCAS applications for undergraduate. So, of course, that helps to an extent because we are getting quality applications that really do want to come. But of course, we're shutting ourselves off to some students that would want to apply direct. I can't really see that ever changing. And I think a lot of Russell groups are similar in that kind of UCAS way of doing things. For postgraduate, we have application fees for all of our postgraduate business courses. That helps a bit in terms of managing those more serious applications. But then that can be a challenge in places like Vietnam where, they're less inclined to pay the application fee. We kind of filter, do those kind of first checks on minimum entry requirements, etc. But I don't think, we're doing it in a perfect way. I do think a lot of students will get lost in those kind of volume markets. We do have certain deadlines for Chinese applicants, which is slightly earlier. So then we can deal with those applications at the beginning of the cycle, which helps. But I don't think we've got it perfect by any means at the moment. And I know a lot of other Russell groups also struggle with this.
It's an ongoing challenge, and a challenge that Acumen can help you with. That's right. But my challenge right now is to get through the questions, so I'm moving on. So is demand within the region predominantly for face-to-face programs, or is there significant demand for programs delivered digitally or via blended learning?
Can I maybe take that one? Just also sort of in the interest of time, I guess. So we've actually looked at this and even done surveys previously of families and even employers as well to understand how employers see online learning for the purposes of graduates and employment. And generally, what we found is that for Vietnam, and I think this applies probably in a general way across the region, is that for longer term study, such as undergraduate study, there's not much interest in pure online. Around the margins, so sort of preparation courses like short-term foundation programs, for example, postgraduate, I think either end, there are potential to look at online and even better blended if you can manage it. But in the middle, that core undergraduate product, families and students and employers are all looking for that face-to-face. Students are looking for the student experience, and employers are looking for some what they perceive as quality stamp by having students having attended a physical program.
Okay. Celia?
Can I just add to that as well, Nick? I think what COVID has really highlighted is that the appetite to study online is gone. They do want that in-person experience. And also, I think we need to be really mindful that not every home environment is conducive to learning online. So a lot of students do value that extra experience, that experience beyond just the classroom. And that's what they're paying for as well.
So another question's got 4 votes. What would you say are the employability expectations or needs of Southeast Asian students? Do the majority want to stay in the UK or the country of choice, or do you get a mix of their wants? We kind of answered this a little bit about global mobility and global employability, but obviously the volume and the interest from South Asia has been largely around immigration for employment and the graduate route. So is that the same kind of thing coming from these countries?
If I can take that, Heike. I think from a Malaysian perspective, from a Thai perspective or Indonesian perspective, the desire for employability, is to get graduate employability. But the desire to work overseas is not as high. So it's the opportunity to take that certificate and move across regions and across countries. That is what makes it more attractive, and that's what they want. So parents are willing to pay, but they want to see that what they are paying for is enabling their child to get an easier route to employment.
And just maybe a quick contrast to that, because I think it does differ across the region, and that's why we keep talking about diversity. Diversification is probably the key theme of the whole webinar in many ways. When you look at Vietnam, for example, their ROI measured by employment outcomes is absolutely critical. And as part of that, they are looking at post-study work rights, so a really important part of that calculation. Interestingly, when you look at Vietnam, so traditionally, you may have seen more Vietnamese students looking to then stay on and look at residence or pathway opportunities, but increasingly that's shifting. We've just surveyed students, parents recently about where they see their future opportunity. Michael just posted in the chat our Vietnam Voices report, which I recommend you have a look at, which is really interesting about parent sentiments towards T&E. But what that revealed was that parents see, about 50% of parents now see their child's future opportunity actually in Vietnam, not overseas. And I think if you had done the same survey 10 years ago, probably would have been 75% saw their children's opportunity overseas. So it's really shifting. And then Philippines, because someone asked about Philippines earlier as well. Philippines, I think, is again, it's a different set of dynamics. So it's very much a work and migration market. And you can see that in terms of the huge numbers of students, for example, going from Philippines to Canada because of traditionally sort of, how would you say, more relaxed visa policies and opportunities for that pathway to residence. So that's really been very attractive to Filipino students in particular.
Yeah, I think it's just so fascinating, the kind of geopolitical divisions around each country. Which ones align themselves with the UK or with Australia, New Zealand, and then you have this US-China kind of tension happening in the area. And I just think it's fascinating to see how those countries, populations and economies are developed, and then where they choose to want to study and work longer term. And I guess so much of that, as you said, comes from diaspora and K-12 and all of the things they've been exposed to earlier on in the cycle. But yeah, it's my observations. Yeah, and someone has asked me, someone's asking here how we recommend marketing to these specific countries. So, you know, countries like China, we know have very specific needs around social channels and things like that. Does the same exist in Southeast Asia? Are there very specific communication channels that aren't what the Western world are used to?
Can I just say very quickly, word of mouth is so powerful in Southeast Asia. And parents and students listen to what other parents and other students have experienced. So for universities, your secret weapon is actually your current students and your past students and your current employees who are working, who are from that region. So it's very powerful. The testament that you give is so powerful. One of the things that helped me be very successful, not just for myself, but for the institutions that I represented in Southeast Asia, is just my journey as a student, as somebody who then worked and settled in the UK. So that's very, very powerful.
Perfect. I'm just trying to see if Hiker is left or if he's coming back for us. Okay, so any other questions that I'm just surveying?
Nick, just a very quick point, just to add in on C's comments. And sorry, I dropped out there. I didn't have anything else better to do. It's just Vietnamese internet. I think the key point here is in terms of social media channels, they do vary in terms of popularity across the different markets. So what works in one market won't work necessarily in a different market across Southeast Asia. And the second point, and I think this is even more important in terms of social media strategy, is really figuring out who you're actually trying to target. Are you targeting the parents or are you targeting the students? Because they're on very different platforms as well. And so those are that's the sort of matrix of, I guess, decision making you need to make if you're looking at social media and paid social media engagement across the region.
Yeah. I mean, there are two more questions here about foreign policy from other countries as well, looking to recruit from the region. We can see by the huge audience here that, you know, this is a particular priority for people. We know that, say, Indonesia, one of the, you know, massive growth economies, will it realize that potential? So I guess the kind of overall takeaway for me is that we're not alone. This can't be fly-by marketing. It's got to be the hub and spoke operations we've talked about. It's got to be well planned, thought out T&E, early engagement, lots and lots of things happening here that to really make some success out of it.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating market. I know we're drawing into a close. One of the things that I wanted to try to do today was to talk about T&E opportunity in the region, particularly given that Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong are powerhouse T&E markets. You've got Vietnam and Indonesia and other markets coming on stream for T&E. So maybe we'll collaborate and do another session, Nick, on T&E and specifically focus it on Southeast Asia, which is a really, really good, high quality market with so much opportunity for T&E.
Yeah, I mean, given the engagement today, I think we could definitely repeat this session or get into some more of these topics. As I say, this is going to be available for rewatching, and I know the Acumen team will go through some of the questions here and reach out to people as well who had questions we haven't answered or want access to some of their insight reports. So a massive thank you to the panel. Pete, do you want to just close and explain how people want to get in touch? I'm sure people will be interested to get in touch with you after this.
Yeah, sure thing. I think there is a button at the moment if people are quick with connect with Acumen at the bottom. I did put my email address in the account there, but if people have got a pen there, pete.richards@sanams4.com is my email address, and I can filter any additional questions that you have across to colleagues. Acumen.education is our website. It's a bit of a weird URL. We struggle with that sometimes, but acumen.education is our website. If you want to go on there, you'll also find the Connect with Acumen link amongst that series of web pages. But just to echo your point, thanks so much, Nick. The panel has been fantastic today. And, Southeast Asia is a market that I've never physically worked in international recruitment. So every time I speak with colleagues from the sector, such as Steph and Jasmine and actual colleagues, Cecilia and Heike, I personally learned so much. So thanks so much for your time today. It's been amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And thanks again for the
guys.
engagement. And we'll see you all again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.